The door slammed open as the storm screamed outside, and the man bleeding onto her diner floor wasn't begging for help. He was watching her, calculating, dangerous. Regina had seconds to decide whether to save him or let the blizzard finish the job, because if she chose wrong, she wouldn't live to see morning. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. The blizzard hit the city like a weapon. Through frosted diner windows, 70-year-old Regina Coleman watched the street disappear under violent sheets of snow. Then her door burst open. A man in a blood-soaked black suit staggered inside expensive watch, prison tattoos, eyes like winter itself. Outside, the temperature was dropping to 15 below. Without shelter, the bleeding stranger wouldn't survive the night. Her hands trembled on the counter, not from cold, from knowing. These were the kind of scars you didn't ask about. The kind of man who left no witnesses. He could overpower her in seconds, take everything she had, hurt her in ways she'd spent 7 decades avoiding. But he was human, and he was dying. Regina had an impossible choice: lock the door and let the storm finish what his enemies started, or open her heart and risk everything. What she didn't know was that the man bleeding into her red vinyl booth wasn't just any criminal. He was Enrique Juarez, and her next decision would change not just 2 lives, but transform her entire neighborhood forever. But before that life-changing moment, Regina Coleman was fighting a battle she seemed destined to lose. At 70, Regina lived alone above a diner that was slowly dying beneath her. The chrome counter had lost its shine years ago. Vinyl booths were patched with duct tape in 3 places. The neon sign outside flickered more than it glowed, and half the letters didn't work anymore. Every morning at 5:30, Regina made coffee in a pot older than most cars on the road. She'd sit in the same corner booth her late husband had loved, watching sunrise paint the empty street gold, praying for enough customers to keep the lights on another month. Her $1,100 Social Security check barely covered utilities and supplies. Real profit was a memory she couldn't afford to revisit. Tonight, the weather had been the final insult. The forecast called it a historic winter storm. Meteorologists used words like catastrophic and life-threatening. By 6 p.m., the city had issued a shelter-in-place order. Roads became impassable within an hour. Power lines sagged under ice. Regina had sent home her only waitress at 5:30, right after the last customer left. The girl was young, with 2 babies at home. She needed to get back before the worst hit. That left Regina alone. She moved through her closing routine with practiced efficiency despite the arthritis in her knees. Wiped down the counter, checked the grill, counted the register $127 for the entire day, barely enough to restock eggs and coffee. The diner looked exactly like it did in the image she kept in her wallet from 1982. Same checkered floor, black and white tiles that had survived 4 decades of foot traffic. Same red vinyl booths with chrome edges. Same pendant lights hanging from the ceiling, casting warm circles against the gathering darkness outside. But everything felt older now. Tired. Like Regina herself. She wore her usual work clothes, a floral blouse under a brown cardigan, a practical tan apron tied at her waist, a long dark skirt that fell past her knees, comfortable shoes for standing all day. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, the way she'd worn it since her husband passed. Through the wide windows, snow attacked the glass like it had personal business with the world. Wind howled between buildings. The streetlights barely penetrated the white curtain falling from the sky. Regina pulled her cardigan tighter and moved toward the back booth. She kept a pillow and blanket there for nights like this, nights when driving home was suicide. Her little apartment 3 blocks away, might as well have been 3 states away. The ancient coffee maker gurgled behind the counter, finishing its last pot of the night. The sound was comforting, familiar. Regina had heard it 10,000 times. She was reaching for the light switch when the door exploded inward. Snow blasted across the checkered floor. Wind shrieked through the opening like a living thing. And in the doorway stood a man Regina would remember for the rest of her life. Tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s maybe, though pain aged him. His black suit was expensive, she could tell, even soaked and torn as it was. No tie. The collar of his white shirt hung open, stained dark with blood that looked black in the dim light. But it was his face that froze Regina where she stood. Strong features. Dark hair slicked back with melting snow. a jaw that looked carved from stone, and tattoos ink climbing up his neck from beneath his collar, disappearing into his hairline. More tattoos wrapped around his hands like gloves, the kind of artwork that told stories Regina didn't want to hear. His eyes found hers, dark, calculating, exhausted beyond measure. He took one step inside, then another. His expensive leather shoes left bloody prints on her clean floor. "Please," he said, just that one word. His voice was rough, controlled despite obvious pain, an accent she couldn't quite place Spanish maybe, smoothed by years of English. Then his knees buckled. He caught himself on the nearest booth, the red vinyl one by the window, and collapsed into the seat. His head fell back against the cushion. Blood seeped from somewhere beneath his jacket. His breath came in short, controlled bursts. Regina's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd lived 70 years in this city, raised 2 sons in the apartment upstairs before they moved away, buried a husband who'd worked construction for 40 years. She'd seen plenty of hard men, dangerous men who carried violence like other people carried wallets. This man was all of those things. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than her diner made in 6 months. His suit, even ruined, screamed money. But the tattoos, the scars on his knuckles, the way his eyes never stopped moving even while his body failed, those screamed something else entirely. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow piled against the windows. The temperature dropped. She could feel it even inside, could feel the cold pressing against the glass like hands trying to get in. Regina looked at the phone behind the counter. She could call the police. Should call the police. But the man's eyes were closing. His breathing was slowing down. Whatever had happened to him, whatever violence had put him in her diner bleeding and half frozen, he was dying. She stood there, one hand gripping her dish towel, the other clutching the edge of the counter. The door still hung open behind him. Snow continued to pour inside, melting into dark puddles on her checkered floor. Regina Coleman had a choice to make, and she had about 30 seconds to make it. Regina's feet moved before her mind caught up. She crossed the checkered floor in 6 steps, grabbed the door, and shoved it closed against the wind. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sound that felt far too final. The sudden silence, just the muffled howl of wind outside and the man's ragged breathing pressed against her ears. She'd made her choice. Now she had to live with it. The stranger hadn't moved. His head remained tilted back against the red vinyl, eyes closed, one arm pressed against his side where the blood was coming from. In the harsh fluorescent light, Regina could see him more clearly now. Mid-40s, like she'd thought. Strong features that might have been handsome if they weren't twisted with pain. The tattoos on his neck were intricate symbols and letters she didn't recognize, the kind of ink that told stories in a language she'd never learned. "Can you hear me?" Regina's voice came out steadier than she felt. His eyes opened, dark brown, almost black. They focused on her with an intensity that made her step back despite herself. These weren't the eyes of a man lost to pain. They were sharp, calculating, always working. Yes, that same rough voice, controlled, no begging, no drama. "You're bleeding, I know. How bad?" He shifted slightly, grimaced. "Bad enough." Regina's nursing instincts, honed from raising 2 boys and caring for a dying husband, kicked in automatically. She moved to the booth, her arthritic knees protesting, and reached for his jacket. His hand shot out and caught her wrist. Not hard, not threatening, but fast. Impossibly fast for a man who looked half dead. Regina froze. His grip was firm, warm despite the cold still clinging to his clothes. She could feel the calluses on his palm, the strength in fingers that had clearly done violence. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. "But I need you to understand what you're doing. I'm trying to keep you from bleeding out on my floor. There are men looking for me." His eyes never left hers. "If they find me here, they'll burn this place down. With you in it." Regina's pulse hammered in her throat, but she didn't pull away. "Then we better make sure they don't find you." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion, like he'd expected fear and found something else entirely. He released her wrist. Regina unbuttoned his jacket with shaking hands. The fabric was soaked, heavy with melting snow and blood. Beneath it, his white shirt clung to his torso, dark stains spreading from a wound on his left side, just above his hip. "Knife or bullet?" she asked. "Knife. Deep? Deeper than I'd like." Regina straightened up, her mind already cataloging what she'd need. "Stay here. Don't move. Wasn't planning on dancing." Despite everything, Regina almost smiled. She hurried behind the counter, pulled out the first aid kit she kept beneath the register. Hardly adequate for this, but it would have to do. She grabbed clean dish towels, a bottle of whiskey from the locked cabinet, and the emergency sewing kit from the drawer. When she returned, the stranger was watching the windows. His eyes tracked every shadow, every shift in the falling snow outside. Even injured, even bleeding, his body remained coiled, ready. This was a man who'd survived by never relaxing, by always expecting the next attack. Regina set her supplies on the table and began folding towels into makeshift bandages. "I need you to take off your shirt." He complied without argument, shrugging out of the jacket and unbuttoning his shirt with steady hands. When he pulled it away, Regina had to force herself not to react. His torso was a map of violence. Scars crisscrossed his ribs, old bullet wounds puckered on his shoulder and chest. Burns, knife marks, the tattoos continued down his arms, elaborate designs that covered what looked like even older scars beneath. But the fresh wound was what demanded her attention. A 4-inch gash across his left side, deep enough to need stitches, bleeding steadily but not catastrophically. "You're lucky," Regina said, pouring whiskey onto a clean towel. "Whoever did this missed anything vital." "Luck had nothing to do with it. He was aiming for my kidney. I moved." Regina pressed the whiskey-soaked towel against the wound. He flinched but made no sound. She worked quickly, cleaning the area, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Her hands remembered this work from decades ago, cleaning her son's scraped knees, tending to her husband's construction injuries. But this was different. This was deliberate violence, professional violence. "What's your name?" she asked, not looking up from her work. "Does it matter?" "I'd like to know who I'm risking my life for." Silence. Then, "Enrique." "Regina, I know." Her hands paused. "How?" He nodded toward the counter. She followed his gaze to the small nameplate next to the register. "Regina's Diner" in faded gold letters. "You're observant. It keeps me alive." Regina resumed working, pressing fresh towels against the wound. The bleeding was slowing. "This needs real stitches. A hospital." "No hospitals. You could get infected. I'll take my chances." She looked at him then, really looked at him. He was watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. No fear, no shame, just careful assessment, like he was trying to figure out what kind of person would help a bleeding stranger in a storm. "Why did you come here?" Regina asked. "Of all the places in this city, why my diner? It was close." The door was unlocked. He paused, and the lights were on. Something in the way he said it made Regina's chest tighten. The lights were on. In a city gone dark, in a storm that had swallowed everything, her little diner had been a beacon. She'd almost turned those lights off 10 minutes ago. "You have money?" she asked. He gestured toward his jacket. Regina reached into the inside pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash, held together with a rubber band. Her eyes widened. There had to be thousands of dollars there. "Take what you need," Enrique said. Regina set the money on the table without counting it. "I don't help people for pay." His expression shifted. The control slipped for just a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like bewilderment. "Everyone wants something. I want you to not die on my floor." Regina applied a final layer of bandaging, taping it securely. "That's enough for tonight." Outside, headlights swept across the windows. Enrique's entire body went rigid. His hand disappeared beneath the table, and Regina knew without seeing that he'd just drawn a weapon. The lights moved slowly past. Too slowly, like someone searching. Neither of them breathed. The headlights crawled past like predators searching for prey. Regina stood frozen beside the booth, one hand still holding the blood-soaked towel, the other gripping the edge of the table. Enrique remained perfectly still, his right hand hidden beneath the surface, undoubtedly wrapped around whatever weapon he'd been carrying. The lights moved on, disappeared into the white chaos of the storm, but the tension in Enrique's shoulders didn't ease. His eyes tracked from window to window, calculating angles, measuring distances. Even wounded, even in pain, his mind was working through scenarios Regina didn't want to imagine. "They'll come back," he said quietly. Not a guess. A certainty. Regina's knees chose that moment to remind her she'd been standing too long. She lowered herself carefully into the booth across from him, her arthritis flaring. The red vinyl was cold through her skirt. For the first time in 40 years of running this diner, Regina truly understood what it meant to be trapped. "Who are they?" she asked. "People I disappointed." "That's not an answer." Enrique's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "It's the only one I can give you." Regina studied his face in the harsh overhead light. Even battered and bleeding, there was something almost regal about him. The way he held himself, the careful precision of his words. This wasn't a common street criminal. This was someone accustomed to power, to control, to being obeyed without question. "You're not from around here," she observed. "No, but you know the city well enough to find my diner in a blizzard." "I know every street in this city." His eyes met hers. Every alley, every exit, every place to hide. The weight of that statement settled between them. This man had mapped the city for survival, for war. Regina stood slowly, her knees protesting again. "You need food. When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday. Maybe." "Maybe?" Things got complicated. She moved behind the counter, her hands automatically reaching for familiar things. The grill, the coffee pot. She poured 2 cups thick, black coffee that had been sitting too long but would still warm them both. "I don't need," Enrique started. "You need coffee," Regina interrupted, setting a cup in front of him. "And food. I'm not asking." He looked at the cup like it might be poisoned. Then he wrapped both hands around it, and Regina saw his fingers tremble slightly before he controlled them. The cold had gotten deeper into him than she'd realized. She returned to the grill, firing it up with practiced efficiency. The familiar sizzle of butter on hot metal was comforting. Normal. She cracked eggs, laid bacon strips, dropped bread in the toaster. Her body moved through the routine it had performed 10,000 times. Behind her, Enrique sipped his coffee in silence. "My husband built this diner," Regina said, not turning around. 1978. Did most of the work himself. Those booths, that counter, even installed the floor tiles one by one. She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe because the silence felt too heavy. Maybe because if these were her last hours, she wanted someone to know her story. He died 6 years ago. Heart attack. Went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. She flipped the eggs with a quick flick of her wrist. "Most peaceful way to go, I suppose. You've been running this place alone since then?" "Had a son who helped for a while. Then he got a job in Denver. Better pay, better life. Can't blame him for leaving." The bacon popped and crackled. Regina transferred everything to a plate: 3 eggs, crispy bacon, buttered toast, home fries she'd prepped that morning in a different lifetime. She set the plate in front of Enrique. "Eat." He looked at the food, then at her, then back at the food. "I have money. I told you already." Regina lowered herself back into the booth, cradling her own coffee cup. "I don't help people for pay. Then why are you helping me at all?" It was a fair question. Regina had been asking herself the same thing from the moment she'd locked that door. "Because you're human," she said finally. "And you were dying on my porch. Most people would have called the police. Most people don't run diners in neighborhoods like this for 40 years. Regina sipped her coffee. "You learn to see the difference between someone who's dangerous and someone who's in danger. And which one am I? Both." Enrique picked up his fork. For a moment, Regina thought he might argue further. Instead, he began to eat, slowly at first, then faster, like a man remembering he was starving. Regina watched the storm through the window. Snow had buried her street completely. The parked cars looked like white hills. The streetlight across the way flickered, struggling against the wind. "This storm," Enrique said between bites. "It's not supposed to break until morning. That's what they said." "That's a long time to hide a man people want to find." Regina met his eyes. "Then we better figure out how to make it through the night." He set down his fork. "You should ask me to leave." "Should I?" "Yes. Will you?" "If you ask." Regina considered this. Outside, another set of headlights appeared, moving even slower than before. A dark SUV, windows tinted, prowling through the storm like a shark through deep water. Enrique's hand moved beneath the table again. But he didn't stand, didn't reach for his jacket. The SUV stopped directly in front of the diner. Regina's heart climbed into her throat. Through the snow-covered windows, she could barely make out shapes inside the vehicle. 2 people in front, maybe more in back. "Don't move," Enrique whispered. "Don't look at them directly." Regina kept her eyes on her coffee cup, every muscle in her body locked tight. The diner suddenly felt impossibly exposed. All those wide windows, all that light spilling out into the darkness. Seconds crawled past like hours. Then the SUV's engine revved. It pulled away, tires spinning slightly in the deep snow before finding traction. The taillights disappeared into the white void. Regina released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her hands shook as she set down her coffee cup. "They're searching every building," Enrique said quietly. "Every business. Every place someone might hide. Will they come inside? Eventually." He pushed his empty plate away. "When they've exhausted everywhere else." Regina stood and gathered his plate. At the counter, she washed it mechanically, her mind spinning. She was 70 years old. She'd lived a quiet life, raised good sons, loved one good man, run an honest business. How had she ended up harboring a fugitive from people who drove like that, searched like that? "I could still call the police," she said without turning around. "You could, but you'd be dead before they arrived." "Probably." Regina dried the plate and set it back in its stack. Everything in its place, everything ordered. Her whole life, she'd maintained order. "Then I suppose we're committed to this," she said. When she turned around, Enrique was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Why?" he asked again, softer this time. "Really? Why risk this?" Regina thought about her husband, about her sons, about 40 years of feeding strangers in this diner. "Because someone has to," she said simply. Outside, the storm raged on. The clock behind the counter read 9:47 p.m. Regina refilled their coffee cups for the third time, her hands steadier now despite the fear coiled in her stomach. The diner had become its own small world, warm light, quiet hum of the ancient refrigerator, wind howling outside like something trying to claw its way inside. Enrique had moved to a booth with better sightlines, the one in the back corner where her husband used to sit with his newspaper every Sunday morning. From there, he could see both the front door and the windows facing the street. His jacket was draped over the seat beside him, within easy reach. Regina knew without asking that his weapon was still in his hand beneath the table. "Tell me about them," she said, settling into the booth across from him. "The people looking for you. You don't want to know. I'm already in this. Might as well understand what I'm in." Enrique was quiet for a long moment, his eyes tracking the street outside. Snow continued to fall in thick sheets, accumulating on windowsills, piling against the door. "I had a shipment," he said finally. "Important one. High value. Someone intercepted it before it reached the buyer. Drugs? Does it matter? I suppose not. The buyer thinks I stole it. My people think I lost it. Everyone thinks someone betrayed someone." He sipped his coffee. "In my business, suspicion is a death sentence." "And did you steal it?" His eyes found hers. No, Regina believed him. Maybe she was foolish to, but something in his voice carried the weight of truth. "So they sent men to kill you." 3 of them. In a parking garage, 2 hours before the storm hit. His jaw tightened. "I survived. They didn't." The casual way he said it sent ice through Regina's veins. Not proud, not ashamed, simply stating fact. "And the people in those SUVs? Cleanup crew. Making sure the job gets finished." Regina absorbed this. Outside her diner, in her neighborhood, men were hunting another man with the intent to kill him, and she'd chosen to stand between them and their target. "How many are there?" she asked. "At least 6, maybe more. Armed? Very." The lights flickered, once, twice, then held steady. Regina's heart lurched. The power. "It's the storm." Enrique's voice remained calm, but his eyes had sharpened. "Lines are going down all over the city." As if to confirm this, the streetlight outside sputtered and died. Darkness swallowed the street. Now only Regina's diner glowed a solitary beacon in a sea of black and white. "We need to turn off some lights," Enrique said, already moving. Pain flashed across his face as he stood, but he pushed through it. He reached the wall switches and killed the overhead fluorescents, leaving only the pendant lights above the counter and one booth light in the back. The diner immediately felt smaller, more intimate, more vulnerable. Regina watched him move despite his injury, economical, purposeful, someone who'd learned to work through pain. He checked the locks on the door, tested the windows, assessed every possible entry point. "The back door?" he asked. "Storage room. Leads to an alley. Show me." Regina led him past the counter, through the narrow hallway where she kept her coat, to the storage room at the back. Boxes of supplies lined metal shelves. Bags of flour, canned goods, cleaning products. The back door was solid steel with a deadbolt and chain. Enrique tested it, nodded approval. "Good. If someone comes through the front, we go out the back. Into a blizzard? Better than the alternative." They returned to the dining area. Regina's knees were screaming now, but she ignored them. Adrenaline was a powerful painkiller. Headlights appeared again. This time, 3 vehicles, moving in formation. They crawled down the street like wolves coordinating a hunt. "Get down," Enrique said quietly. "Behind the counter. Now." Regina's body obeyed before her mind could protest. She crouched behind the chrome counter, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Through the gap beneath the counter's edge, she could see Enrique pressed against the wall beside the window, barely visible in the dim light. The vehicles stopped. All three of them, right in front of the diner. Doors opened. Regina heard them even through the wind, heavy thuds that meant business. Men's voices, muffled by the storm but unmistakable. Said he was bleeding. Couldn't have gone far. Check everything. Footsteps crunched through snow. Coming closer. Regina's breath came in short gasps. She pressed one hand over her mouth to quiet the sound. With her other hand, she gripped the edge of the counter so hard her arthritic knuckles screamed. A face appeared at the window. Young, maybe 30. Cold eyes scanning the interior. He cupped his hands against the glass, peering inside. Regina froze. Didn't breathe. Didn't move. The man's eyes swept across the empty booths, the dim lights, the counter where Regina hid. For one horrible moment, she was certain he'd seen her. Then another voice called out, "Anything? Place looks closed. Check it anyway." The doorknob rattled. Once. Twice. It held. "Locked," the young man called. "Nobody's been here." "You sure?" "Windows are fogged. If anyone was inside, it'd be warm enough to see in clearly." Silence. Regina could almost feel them deciding. "Move on," a deeper voice commanded. "Warehouse district next." He might have holed up there. More footsteps. Retreating now. Doors slammed. Engines revved. The vehicles began to move. But they moved slowly. Reluctantly. Like predators not quite convinced the prey had escaped, Regina remained crouched behind the counter, every muscle locked, until the sound of engines faded completely into the storm. Only then did Enrique move from his position. He crossed to the counter, looked down at Regina. "They're gone." Regina tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. The adrenaline that had sustained her was draining away, leaving nothing but trembling exhaustion. Enrique offered his hand. She stared at it for a moment, this hand that had killed 3 men just hours ago. This hand covered in tattoos and scars. Then she took it. He pulled her up gently, steadying her when her knees wobbled. "You did good," he said. Regina's laugh came out shaky, almost hysterical. "I hid behind my own counter while armed men looked for someone to kill. That's not good. That's terrified. Terrified is smart. Terrified keeps you alive." She pulled away from him, moving to the booth on unsteady legs. Her whole body felt like water. "How do you live like this? Always looking over your shoulder. Always waiting for someone to come kill you. You get used to it. That's a terrible way to live." "Yes," Enrique said simply. "It is." He sat down across from her. And for the first time, Regina saw genuine weariness in his face. Not just physical exhaustion, but something deeper, soul deep. "They'll be back," he said. "I know. When they realize they've searched everywhere else, this diner will be the last place standing. Then we better figure out how to make them believe nobody's here." Enrique studied her. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd break." Regina thought about this. About her husband dying in his sleep. About her sons leaving for better lives. About 40 years of barely surviving while watching her neighborhood decay. "I broke a long time ago," she said. "I just learned how to hold the pieces together." Outside, the storm intensified. Inside, 2 strangers sat across from each other in a red vinyl booth, bound by circumstance and an impossible night. The clock read 10:23 p.m. Dawn was still 8 hours away. The hours crawled. Regina dimmed the remaining lights until the diner existed in a soft amber glow, enough to see by, not enough to broadcast their presence to every set of eyes searching the storm. The pendant lights above the counter cast long shadows across the checkered floor. Outside, snow continued its relentless assault, building drifts against the windows that rose higher with each passing hour. 11:47 p.m. The clock's second hand ticked with maddening slowness. Enrique had been silent for nearly 30 minutes, his eyes tracking the street with mechanical precision. Every car that passed, and there were fewer, now drew his complete attention. His hand never strayed far from the weapon Regina knew was tucked against his side. She brought him water, checked his bandages. The bleeding had stopped, but the makeshift dressing was already soaked through in places. "You need to rest," she said. "I need to stay alert. You need both." He looked at her then, something almost like amusement flickering across his features. "You're bossy for someone half my size. I'm a grandmother. Bossy as a job requirement. You have grandchildren? The question caught Regina off guard. No. My sons. They moved away, started their own lives. No kids yet, but you would have liked them. It wasn't a question. Somehow, this dangerous stranger had looked at her and seen that particular loneliness. Yes, Regina said softly. I would have. She sat down across from him in the red vinyl booth, the same booth where they'd spent the last hour existing in careful silence. Close enough to talk, far enough to maintain the illusion of distance, but the night was too long for distance, too quiet for pretense. When's the last time you slept? Regina asked. Enrique's eyes never left the window. 4 days ago. Maybe 5. That's not sustainable. Neither is being dead. Fair point. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then faded just as quickly. Regina watched him in the amber light. Now that the immediate terror had receded, she could see him more clearly. The exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the weight he carried in his shoulders. This wasn't a man who enjoyed violence. This was a man who'd survived because of it and been hollowed out in the process. You ever think about stopping? She asked. Just walking away? Every day, but you don't. Can't. His eyes finally met hers. Once you're in my world, there's no walking away, only dying or disappearing, and disappearing requires resources I don't have anymore. What would you do if you could walk away? The question seemed to genuinely puzzle him, like he'd stopped imagining alternatives so long ago that the neural pathways had atrophied. I don't know, he admitted. Something quiet. Something where people don't know my name or my face. He paused. Something like this, maybe. A diner. Simple. Honest. Regina nearly laughed. Honey, there's nothing simple about running a diner in a neighborhood where the only customers are truck drivers and people too broke to eat anywhere else. But it's yours. It's debt and maintenance, and praying the health inspector doesn't notice the broken tiles in the bathroom. But it's yours, he repeated, quieter this time. You built it, with your husband, and when he died you kept it alive. That's not nothing. The way he said it made Regina's throat tighten. She'd spent so many years thinking of the diner as a burden, a weight she carried because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. Her heart, what about you? Enrique asked. You ever think about walking away? All the time, Regina admitted, especially after Thomas died. Thought about selling, moving to Denver with my oldest son, starting over. Why didn't you? She gestured at the diner, the worn counter, the patched booths, the checkered floor her husband had laid tile by tile. Because this is all I have left of him. Of us. 40 years of coffee and conversation, and watching the neighborhood change. If I walk away from this? She trailed off. It dies with you. Yes. They sat in silence, not uncomfortable now. Just two people who'd accidentally stumbled into honesty because the night was too long and fear too sharp to maintain walls. I killed my first man when I was 17, Enrique said suddenly. He was trying to rob my mother. I had a knife. He had a gun. I was faster. Regina's hands tightened around her coffee cup, but she didn't interrupt. Everyone said I was a hero, defended my family, did what any son would do. His voice was flat, emotionless. But I felt something that night, something I shouldn't have felt. What? Power. He looked at her. I killed a man who was bigger, stronger, armed with more than I had. And I felt powerful. That's when I knew I was broken. You're not broken, Regina. He said her name gently. I've killed 18 people. Some of them deserved it. Most of them were just in my way. That's the definition of broken. And yet, Regina said carefully, when 3 men came to kill you tonight, you survived. And instead of disappearing into this storm, instead of hijacking a car or breaking into an empty house, you stumbled into my diner. Why? The lights were on. No. Regina leaned forward. You could have kicked in my door, taken what you needed, left me tied up or worse. But you didn't. You asked. You said please. A truly broken man doesn't say please. Enrique was quiet for a long time. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, the refrigerator hummed its eternal song. My mother used to run a restaurant, he said finally. In Juarez. Nothing fancy. Just a place where working people could get a hot meal cheap. She'd feed anyone. Didn't matter if they could pay. What happened to her? Wrong place. Wrong time. Cartel caught her in crossfire. His jaw tightened. I was 19. couldn't protect her, couldn't save her, could only bury her and swear I'd never be powerless again. Regina reached across the table, slowly, telegraphing her movement. She placed her weathered hand over his scarred one. "Your mother would be proud you said please," she said. Enrique stared at their hands, hers dark and lined with age, his covered in ink and violence. The contrast should have been jarring. Instead, it looked almost natural. My mother would be ashamed of what I became. Maybe. Or maybe she'd understand that you did what you had to do to survive a world that tried to kill you. His fingers closed around hers, gentle, careful, like he'd forgotten how to hold something without breaking it. The clock read 1:33 a.m. They sat like that for a long time, two people who'd been hollowed out by different kinds of loss, finding unexpected comfort in a red vinyl booth while a blizzard buried the world outside. Neither of them heard the vehicle approaching until its headlights swept across the windows. But this time, the engine didn't pass. It stopped, right outside the door, and someone began pounding on the glass. The pounding shattered their moment like a brick through glass. Enrique's weapon was in his hand before Regina could blink. He was up, moving to the wall beside the door, his body coiled despite the wound in his side. Every trace of the vulnerable man from moments ago had vanished, replaced by something cold and lethal. Regina's heart hammered against her ribs. She stood frozen in the booth, her mind screaming contradictory instructions. "Run, hide, do something. Police, open up!" The voice was muffled by wind and glass, but unmistakable. Official, authoritative. Regina's eyes found Enrique's. He shook his head once, a clear command. "Don't," but the pounding continued. "We're doing welfare checks. Storm stranded some folks. Need to make sure everyone's okay." It sounded legitimate. It sounded exactly like what police would do during a catastrophic blizzard. It could also be a lie. Enrique pressed his back against the wall, weapon raised, waiting. His eyes asked Regina a question. "Do you trust me?" She thought about the last 6 hours, the blood, the fear, the strange intimacy of shared secrets in the darkest part of night. She thought about his mother's restaurant, about the word please. Regina moved to the door. Enrique's eyes widened in warning, but she ignored him. She flipped on the overhead lights, sudden brightness that made both of them wince, and unlocked the deadbolt. The door opened 6 inches before the security chain caught it. A police officer stood on her doorstep. Young, Latino, snowflakes clinging to his uniform. Behind him, a patrol car idled, exhaust steaming in the frigid air. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Ruiz. We're checking businesses along this route. You okay in there?" Regina kept her body in the gap, blocking his view of the interior. "I'm fine. Stayed here instead of driving home in the storm. Smart move. Roads are a mess." He shifted, trying to see past her. "You alone?" "Yes." "Mind if I come in? Just want to make sure your heat's working. No frozen pipes. That sort of thing." Every instinct, Regina had screamed danger, but she couldn't identify which kind danger from the man outside, or danger from the man inside. "Officer," she said carefully, "I appreciate the concern, but my heat's fine. I've got food and coffee. I'm perfectly safe." His eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, something flickered in them. Something that made Regina's blood run cold. This wasn't a welfare check. "Ma'am, I really should come inside. Regulations, and I really need you to respect my space, officer. I'm a 70-year-old woman who's had a long night. Unless you have a warrant, I'm going to ask you to move along." The temperature between them dropped 10 degrees. "Anyone else been by tonight?" he asked. "Any strangers? Someone maybe looking for shelter? In this storm? Nobody's been anywhere near here." He studied her face. Regina held his gaze, channeling every ounce of stubbornness her 70 years had earned her. Finally, he stepped back. "All right, ma'am. You stay safe. Storm should break by dawn." "Thank you, officer." Regina closed the door, locked it, set the chain. Only then did she notice her hands were shaking violently. The patrol car's lights swept across the windows as it pulled away. But it moved slowly. Reluctantly, Enrique emerged from the shadows behind the counter where he'd repositioned himself. "That wasn't a cop." "I know. How did you know?" His eyes. "And cops don't ask if strangers have been by during a blizzard. They ask if you need help." Regina moved back to the booth and collapsed into it, her knees finally giving out. Also, his uniform was too clean, like he'd just put it on. Enrique stared at her with something close to admiration. "You're either very brave or very foolish. After tonight, probably both." He returned to his seat across from her, the weapon now resting on the table between them. The pretense was gone. They both knew what this was now. "They're running out of places to search," Enrique said. "That means they're getting desperate. How much longer until dawn?" He checked his watch. 4 hours. Maybe less. Regina looked out the window. The snow had finally begun to lighten. Not stopping, but slowing. The worst of the storm was passing. "What happens at dawn?" she asked. "They'll have searched everywhere. They'll either give up or they'll come back here with more men and less patience. And if they give up, then I walk out that door and you never see me again." The thought should have brought relief. Instead, Regina felt something unexpected, a strange sadness. This man had crashed into her life like a meteor, bringing terror and blood and impossible choices, but he'd also brought something else, something she hadn't felt in the 6 years since Thomas died. Purpose. Someone who needed her. Not her coffee or her food, but her. Her kindness, her courage. "The sun's coming up," Enrique said quietly. Regina turned to the windows. He was right. The darkness was fading to deep blue, then gray. Snow that had been invisible was now visible, mountains of it, burying cars and streetlights, and the whole world. The storm was ending. "We should check your wound," Regina said, standing. "Regina, don't argue. We've got maybe 30 minutes before this street wakes up. Let me do this." He allowed her to unwrap the makeshift bandages. The wound looked better than she'd expected. No signs of infection, edges beginning to close. She cleaned it again with whiskey, applied fresh towels from her dwindling supply, wrapped it tight. Her hands worked automatically, but her mind was elsewhere. When this night ended, and it would end soon, what would happen? Would Enrique disappear like smoke? Would those men in SUVs come back? Would her diner survive this? "There," she said, taping the final bandage. "That should hold until you can see a real doctor." "I won't be seeing a doctor." "Enrique." "Regina." He caught her hand. "When I leave here, you need to forget I existed. Forget everything about tonight. If anyone asks, you rode out the storm alone. Nothing happened. Nobody came. That's a lie. That's survival." The light continued to grow. Outside, Regina could see her street taking shape, buried but recognizable. A plow rumbled past, orange lights flashing, blades scraping pavement. The city was waking up. Enrique stood, grimacing as his wound pulled. He reached for his jacket, now dry but still blood-stained, shrugged it on carefully. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Regina walked him to the door. Her hand hesitated on the deadbolt. "What will you do?" "What I always do. Survive." She unlocked the door, pulled it open. Cold air rushed in, stealing her breath. The street was empty. Dawn painted everything pink and gold, the snow, the buildings, the world reborn. Enrique stepped onto the threshold, stopped, turned back. "Your diner," he said. "What's the property tax situation?" The question was so unexpected Regina almost laughed. "I'm 3 months behind." "Why?" He pulled out his phone, damaged but functional, and tapped something into it. "Not anymore." Then he walked into the morning. Regina stood in the doorway, watching him go. He moved steadily despite his injury, a dark figure cutting through pristine snow. He didn't look back. She closed the door, locked it, stood there in her empty diner as sunrise flooded through the windows. Only then did she allow herself to cry. Regina didn't open the diner that morning. She sat in the red vinyl booth where she and Enrique had spent the night, watching snow melt in the strengthening sunlight. Her body ached, knees, back, hands, everything, but it was the good kind of ache. The kind that came from surviving something that should have broken you. The coffee pot was empty. She didn't refill it. The grill was cold. She didn't fire it up. For the first time in 40 years, Regina Coleman simply sat in her diner and did nothing. Outside, the city slowly came back to life. Plows rumbled past with increasing frequency. People emerged from buildings, shoveling sidewalks, digging out cars. The sun hit the snow and turned everything into diamonds. Regina's phone buzzed. She'd forgotten she even had it with her. A text from her oldest son in Denver. "Mom, you okay? News says your area got hit hard." She stared at the words for a long time before responding. "I'm fine. Diner kept me safe. It wasn't a lie." Not entirely. Another buzz. This time, an email notification. She almost ignored it, but something made her open it. The subject line read, "Payment confirmation, property tax account." Regina's heart stopped. She opened the email with trembling fingers. The message was brief, official, From the county tax assessor's office. Her property tax account 3 months overdue. Penalty fees accumulating like cancer had been paid in full, including next year's taxes. And the year after that. The payment amount made her dizzy. $47,000. She read it 3 times. Then a 4th. The numbers didn't change. At the bottom, a note. Payment made via third-party service. No further action required. Regina set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. Enrique's words echoed in her memory. Not anymore. He'd done this. Somehow, in the 60 seconds before walking out her door, he'd arranged to pay her property taxes. Years of them. "Oh, honey," Regina whispered to the empty diner. "What did you do?" She stood, ignoring her protesting knees, and moved to the window. The street looked normal now, just another winter day in a struggling neighborhood. No black SUVs, no men with cold eyes searching for prey. But something felt different. Regina pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep through. She'd saved a man's life last night. A dangerous man. A man who'd killed 18 people by his own admission, and he'd just changed hers forever. The door chimed 3 hours later. Regina had finally opened, more from habit than intention. She'd cleaned the counter, restocked napkins, started a fresh pot of coffee. Her hands needed work, her mind needed routine, but she hadn't expected customers. Not after a storm like that. The man who entered wore an expensive charcoal suit under a black wool coat, late 50s, gray at the temples, carrying himself with the kind of authority that came from never being told no. 2 other men flanked him, younger, broader, their eyes constantly scanning. Regina's blood went cold. "Good morning," the man said. His voice was smooth, cultured. "Are you Regina Coleman?" Every instinct screamed at her to lie. But her name was on the sign outside, on the business license framed on the wall. "I am. My name is Mateo Rivera." He approached the counter slowly, hands visible, movements deliberate. "I'm looking for someone. I was hoping you might have seen him." Regina's hand moved toward the phone beneath the register. "I don't know what you're talking about." A man, mid-40s, dark hair, injured. He would have been looking for shelter during the storm. Rivera's eyes swept the diner, cataloging everything: the booths, the windows, the back hallway. This establishment was the only one with lights on last night. "Between 9 p.m. and dawn, I was here alone," Regina said. Her voice stayed steady through sheer force of will. "Rode out the storm by myself. Nobody came in." Rivera studied her face the way a jeweler studies a diamond, looking for flaws, imperfections, cracks that would reveal the truth beneath. "You're certain?" "Positive." He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his coat. Regina's hand closed around the phone. But Rivera withdrew only a business card. He set it on the counter between them, his fingers perfectly manicured, a gold ring gleaming on his right hand. "If you do see this man, his name is Enrique Juarez. I'd appreciate a call. There's a substantial reward for information about his whereabouts." He paused. "He's dangerous, Mrs. Coleman. A criminal. Someone you wouldn't want in a place like this." Regina looked at the card without touching it. Then she looked at Rivera. "If he's so dangerous, why isn't this a police matter?" Rivera's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The police have their methods. We have ours. We, business associates. Mr. Juarez borrowed something that doesn't belong to him. We'd like it returned." The air in the diner had gone very still, very cold. "I'll keep an eye out," Regina said flatly. Rivera studied her for another long moment. Then he turned to leave. His men followed, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who hurt others for a living. At the door, Rivera paused. "You have a lovely establishment, Mrs. Coleman. Be a shame if anything happened to it." The door closed behind them. Regina didn't move until their black Mercedes disappeared down the street. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the stool behind the counter, her entire body shaking. They knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to come here. Enough to threaten her. Her phone buzzed. Another text from her son. "Just saw the weather cleared. Love you, Mom." Regina stared at those words. "Love you, Mom," and something hardened in her chest. She picked up Rivera's business card. Expensive stock, embossed lettering. Just a name and phone number. No company, no title. She tore it in half, then in half again, and again, until it was nothing but confetti that she swept into the trash. Whatever Enrique Juarez was, whatever he'd done, he'd treated her with respect. He'd said please. He'd paid her taxes. These men, they'd threatened her home. Regina made a decision. If Rivera came back, if anyone came asking questions, her answer wouldn't change. She'd ridden out the storm alone. Nothing happened. Nobody came. She was good at protecting what mattered. She'd been doing it for 40 years. 2 days passed. The diner returned to its normal rhythm, sparse morning crowd, emptier afternoons. The lonely dinner hour with truckers and regulars who came more for company than food. Regina went through her routines. Coffee, grill, dishes. The familiar dance of a life lived in service. But everything felt different now. She noticed things she'd stopped seeing years ago. The way morning light hit the checkered floor, the sound of the door chime, the warmth of steam rising from fresh coffee. She'd spent 6 years existing in the shadow of her husband's death, running this diner because she didn't know what else to do. Now she remembered why it mattered. On the third morning, she was opening the register when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, curiosity, fate, made her pick up. Regina, Enrique's voice. Quiet, controlled. Don't say my name. Just listen. Her heart leaped into her throat. I'm listening. Men came to see you. Rivera. Yes. What did you tell him? That I was alone during the storm. That nobody came. Silence on the other end. Long enough that Regina thought he'd hung up. Why? He finally asked. Regina looked around her diner, the place her husband built, the place she'd kept alive through sheer stubbornness, the place that now had 3 years of paid property taxes because a stranger said please. Because someone has to choose kindness, she said. Even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous. Another pause. When Enrique spoke again, his voice carried something Regina hadn't heard before. Emotion. The men looking for me, they won't stop. Rivera won't stop. They think I have something that belongs to them. Do you? No. But truth doesn't matter to men like that. So what happens now? Now? She could almost hear him smile. Now you forget this number. You forget I called. And you live your life. Regina Coleman. You keep that diner running. You keep being stubborn and brave and impossibly kind. Enrique. You saved my life. I won't forget that. Ever. The line went dead. Regina stood behind her counter, phone pressed to her ear, listening to silence. Then she set it down, wiped her hands on her apron, and went back to work. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, Regina's diner stood a small beacon of warmth in a cold world. And somewhere out there, a dangerous man carried the memory of one grandmother's mercy. The knock came at 6:47 a.m. Regina was wiping down the counter, preparing for the morning rush that rarely came anymore. She'd opened early, unable to sleep after Enrique's call 3 days ago. The diner had become both sanctuary and prison, the only place she felt safe, the only place she felt exposed. The knock was firm but not aggressive, official. Through the frosted glass, she could see a figure in a uniform. Her stomach dropped. Not again. She approached cautiously, dish towel still in her hand. We're not open yet. Mrs. Coleman? A woman's voice. I'm from City Building Inspections. I need a few minutes of your time. Regina's mind raced. Building inspections? She was current on everything barely, but current. Unless this was another threat disguised as bureaucracy. She opened the door 6 inches. The woman was mid-40s, black, wearing a city badge and carrying a tablet. She looked tired but genuine. I'm sorry to come by so early. There's been a work order filed for this property. Major repairs. I need to verify the owner's consent. What repairs? Roof replacement, electrical upgrade, new HVAC system, plumbing overhaul, and... She checked her tablet. Exterior restoration. The work order was filed yesterday. Payment in full. Up front. But we can't proceed without your signature. Regina gripped the doorframe. I didn't request any repairs. According to our records, the work order was submitted by a property management company acting on your behalf, LJ Holdings. They've contracted with our top-rated vendors. The inspector's eyes softened. Mrs. Coleman, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know when someone's getting help they didn't ask for. The question is, do you want it? LJ Holdings. Enrique Juarez. How much are we talking about? Regina whispered. The inspector checked her tablet. $180,000 in materials and labor. Premium everything. This building will be better than new when they're done. Regina's knees buckled. She caught herself on the counter. Ma'am, you okay? I need... Regina couldn't finish the sentence. Her mind was spinning. Property taxes paid. Now this. Enrique hadn't just helped her, he'd transformed her entire situation. "The work starts Monday if you consent," the inspector continued. "They'll work around your business hours. Shouldn't take more than 3 weeks. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of construction, crews and noise and disruption. 3 weeks of her diner being torn apart and rebuilt. 3 weeks of questions she couldn't answer. But also, a roof that didn't leak. Electricity that didn't flicker. Heat that actually worked. Pipes that wouldn't burst the next time winter hit. A future." "Where do I sign?" Regina asked. The inspector left 30 minutes later with Regina's signature on 6 different forms. Regina locked the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Enrique had done this. Somehow, between fleeing her diner and disappearing into whatever shadows men like him disappeared into, he'd arranged for her property taxes and a complete building renovation. $227,000. That's what he'd spent on a woman he'd known for one night. This wasn't payment. This was something else entirely. Her phone rang. Her son. "Mom, I just got a weird email. Something about your building being renovated. What's going on?" Regina closed her eyes. "The building needed work. I found a grant program." "A grant program that covers $180,000 in repairs? It's a neighborhood revitalization initiative. They're helping struggling small businesses." The lie came easily. Too easily. "Mom, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped you with the paperwork." It all happened very fast, honey. They talked for a few more minutes, her son's excitement, his relief that she'd finally be safe in that building, his pride that she'd advocated for herself. Each word of praise felt like a knife. When she hung up, Regina sat in her corner booth and put her head in her hands. What had Enrique done? More importantly, why? Men like him didn't operate on kindness. They operated on debts and leverage and power, which meant this wasn't generosity. It was something more complicated, or maybe she was wrong. Maybe sometimes a man who'd spent his life taking simply wanted to give something back. Maybe mercy had disarmed him the way violence never could. The first truck arrived Monday at 7 a.m. 4 men in work uniforms, carrying tools and materials, professional and efficient. Their foreman introduced himself as David. Explained the schedule. Assured Regina they'd work around her business. By noon, the roof was half stripped. By evening, new support beams were going up. Regina's regulars, the few who still came, watched with confused curiosity. "You come into money, Regina?" Old Mr. Patterson asked, eyeing the workers. "Just some overdue maintenance," she replied, pouring his coffee. "That's more than maintenance. That's a complete overhaul. Building was falling apart. Had to do something." He studied her with eyes that had seen 75 years of human behavior. "You're a terrible liar, Regina Coleman." She smiled despite herself. "Good thing I'm a better cook." By Wednesday, word had spread through the neighborhood. Regina's diner, the dying business everyone had written off, was being restored. Not just repaired, but restored. New roof, new electrical, new everything. People started coming by. Not for food, but to see, to ask questions, to wonder, where'd you get the money? Is someone buying you out? You selling to developers? Regina deflected every question with practiced ease. Grant program, neighborhood initiative, lucky timing. But the attention made her nervous. Every car that slowed down, every stranger who looked too long, she wondered if it was Rivera's people, if they'd noticed the sudden influx of money, if they'd connected it to Enrique. Thursday afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled up outside. Regina's blood turned to ice, but when the door opened, it wasn't Rivera who emerged. It was a woman, elegant, mid-30s, wearing a business suit that cost more than Regina's monthly income. She entered with the confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted. "Mrs. Coleman?" She extended a hand. "My name is Isabella Santos. I represent LJ Holdings." Regina's hand trembled as she shook it. "I signed all the paperwork." "I know. I'm not here about the construction." Isabella glanced at the workers on the roof, then back at Regina. "I'm here to make sure you understand what's happening. I understand someone's being very generous. Mr. Juarez is many things, Mrs. Coleman. Generous is a new one." Isabella's smile was knowing. "He asked me to deliver a message. You saved his life. He respects that. The repairs, the taxes, those are his way of showing respect. I don't need." "This isn't about need. It's about honor." Isabella's voice softened. "In his world, debts matter. You gave him shelter, mercy, protection. He's giving you stability. That's how this works." Regina sank onto her counter stool. "I didn't do it for payment. He knows. That's why it matters." Isabella pulled out another business card different from Rivera's, cleaner, with just a phone number. If anyone bothers you, if Rivera comes back, if anyone asks questions you can't answer, call this number. I don't want to be involved in whatever world he lives in. You're already involved, Mrs. Coleman. The moment you opened that door during the storm, you became involved. Isabella's eyes were kind but firm. The question isn't whether you're involved. It's whether you're protected. She set the card on the counter and left as smoothly as she'd arrived. Regina stared at the card for a long time. Then she tucked it into her apron pocket, beneath the kitchen timer and spare pens and all the other small tools of her daily survival. Outside, the workers continued their labor. Inside, Regina poured herself coffee and watched her diner transform. One night had changed everything. One choice had set off ripples she still couldn't fully see. But for the first time in 6 years, Regina Coleman felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The diner reopened with a new roof 4 weeks after the storm. Regina stood on the sidewalk at dawn, coffee in hand, staring at her building like she'd never seen it before. Because in a way, she hadn't. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by fresh cream and burgundy trim. The broken sign had been replaced with a restored vintage neon that glowed warm and welcoming. New windows gleamed. The door hung straight on new hinges. Her husband's diner, their diner, looked the way it had in 1978. She cried, standing there on the cold sidewalk, tears freezing on her cheeks. Inside was even more remarkable. New booth still, red vinyl but unpatched, gleaming. The checkered floor had been restored, every cracked tile replaced. The counter shone like it hadn't in decades. Behind it, a new grill, new refrigerator, new everything. The workers had even kept the old coffee pot, the one older than most cars. They'd cleaned it, polished it, left it in its spot like a shrine. Regina made the first pot of coffee in her new old diner and sat in the corner booth, Thomas's booth, and let herself feel the full weight of what Enrique had done. He'd given her back her life. The customers came slowly at first. Mr. Patterson, right at 7 a.m. like always. He stopped in the doorway, mouth open. Regina? This the same place? Same place. Better bones. He sat at the counter, running his hand over the smooth surface. Thought you said it was just maintenance. I might have undersold it. You might have. He accepted his coffee, studied her face. You gonna tell me what really happened? Probably not. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Some blessings you don't question. You just accept them. Word spread quickly after that. By mid-morning, people Regina hadn't seen in months started appearing. Drawn by curiosity, drawn by the transformation, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. A young mother with 2 kids, a construction worker on break, 3 teenagers skipping school, a businessman in a suit who'd clearly taken a wrong turn and decided to stay. Regina cooked, poured coffee, made change. Did the work she'd been doing for 40 years, but now it felt different, lighter, like the building's transformation had somehow transformed her too. By noon, every booth was full. Regina, her waitress, young Keisha, who'd been with her 2 years, stood at the counter, eyes wide. What do I do? We're out of clean mugs. Wash faster. Regina laughed. Actually laughed. When was the last time she'd done that? The lunch rush lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of constant motion, constant orders, constant energy. Regina's knees screamed, but she ignored them. Her hands cramped, but she pushed through. This was what the diner was supposed to be. What it had been. Once. Long ago. When the rush finally ebbed, Regina collapsed onto her stool behind the counter. Keisha brought her water. Miss Regina, what happened? We haven't been this busy in... ever. Not since I've been here. Building looks better. People notice. It's more than that. Keisha gestured at the customers still lingering. Look at them. They're happy here. They feel safe. Regina followed her gaze. Keisha was right. The people in her diner weren't just eating. They were settling, talking, laughing, staying. Like they'd found something they'd been missing. The change spread beyond her diner. By the second week, Regina noticed other shifts in the neighborhood. Small ones at first. The abandoned storefront 2 doors down suddenly had new owners. A young couple opening a bookstore. The broken streetlight that had been dark for 3 years was repaired. Graffiti on the corner building was painted over. Mr. Patterson noticed too. Something's happening on this block. Good things, looks like. Doesn't feel random, though. Feels coordinated. His eyes found hers. Feels protected. Regina said nothing. But she knew he was right. Enrique's influence extended beyond her diner. She didn't know how, didn't want to know, but his protection had created a bubble. A space where businesses could thrive, where people felt safe, where the slow decay that had consumed her neighborhood for decades suddenly reversed. One morning, she saw two young men, teenagers, probably gang-affiliated, start to tag the side of her building. Before she could even shout at them, a black SUV pulled up. A man in a suit stepped out, spoke quietly to the teenagers. They dropped their spray cans and left without argument. The man glanced at Regina through the window, nodded once, then drove away. She never saw those teenagers again. Rivera returned on a Tuesday afternoon. Regina was refilling the napkin dispensers when he walked in. Alone this time. He looked older than she remembered. Tired. Defeated. Mrs. Coleman. He sat at the counter without invitation. "Coffee, please." Regina poured without speaking. Set the cup in front of him. He added cream. Stirred slowly. "Nice place. Renovations turned out well. Thank you. Must have cost a fortune. I was fortunate." He sipped his coffee, set it down carefully. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you see Enrique Juarez the night of the storm?" Regina met his eyes. "No. You're sure?" "Positive." Rivera nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. Like he'd accepted something he couldn't change. "He's gone, disappeared. Completely. Best trackers in the business, and nobody can find him. Maybe he left the city. Maybe." Rivera stood, pulled out his wallet. Regina waved him off. "Coffee's on the house." He studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, not cruel, just sad. "You know what the funny thing is? I believe you. I believe you didn't see him that night. But somehow, this building got renovated. Somehow, this block got cleaned up. Somehow, my men can't operate anywhere near here without complications." He set a 20 on the counter anyway. "Enrique Juarez is gone, but his ghost is everywhere." He walked to the door, paused. "You're a lucky woman, Mrs. Coleman. I know." He left. Regina watched his car disappear down the street. She picked up the 20, added it to the register, and went back to work. She never saw Rivera again either. By the end of the second month, Regina's diner had become something unexpected. A hub. The bookstore couple came for coffee every morning. The construction workers made it their regular lunch spot. High school kids did homework in the booths after school. Families came for dinner. Actual families. Multiple generations, filling the space with noise and life. Regina hired 2 more waitresses, updated her menu, started staying open an hour later because people kept coming. One evening, Keisha found her in the back office, staring at the books. "Miss Regina, you okay? We made a profit this month." "That's good, right? First time in 3 years." Keisha hugged her, just wrapped her young arms around Regina's shoulders and held on. "You deserve this." Regina wasn't sure she did. She'd made one choice, one single decision to help a stranger. Everything else had been Enrique's doing. But maybe that's how change worked. One person's mercy rippling outward, touching lives they'd never meet, creating possibilities that couldn't exist before. Regina thought about Enrique out there somewhere, disappeared, protected, alive because she'd chosen compassion over fear. She hoped he'd found peace, or at least something close to it. She hoped he knew what his gratitude had created, not just a renovated building, but a restored community, a place where people felt safe again, where businesses could grow, where hope replaced decay. One night, one stranger, one impossible choice, and everything changed. Winter returned with authority, not the catastrophic blizzard from before, but steady, reliable snow that blanketed the city every few days, the kind of winter people could prepare for, could survive, could almost enjoy. Regina stood behind her counter at 5 a.m., making the first pot of coffee. The diner was dark except for the pendant lights above her workspace. Outside, snow fell in fat, lazy flakes, accumulating on the sidewalk she'd need to shovel before opening. She didn't mind. The work felt good, purposeful. The door chimed. Regina turned, surprised. Nobody came this early anymore, not even Mr. Patterson. A woman stood in the doorway, late 20s, Hispanic, wearing a thin jacket that did nothing against the cold. She held the hand of a little boy, maybe 5, whose lips were blue. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I saw your lights. Are you open?" Regina saw it immediately, the desperation, the fear, the calculation of someone who'd run out of options. She'd seen that same look in a mirror for 6 years. "Not officially," Regina said. "But come in, get warm." The woman nearly collapsed with relief. She guided her son to the nearest booth, wrapped him in her inadequate jacket. The boy didn't cry. That was worse somehow. Like he'd learned crying didn't help. Regina poured hot chocolate without asking, brought it to the boy with steady hands. Careful, it's hot. His eyes went wide. He looked at his mother for permission. It's okay, mijo. Say thank you, he whispered. Regina returned to the counter, started the grill. Eggs, bacon, toast. Real food. The kind that stuck to your ribs. The kind that said, "You matter." The woman watched with tears in her eyes. I can't pay. Not right now. But I can come back. Don't worry about it. No, I'll pay. I just need to… Ma'am. Regina brought the plates, set them down gently. Eat first. Everything else can wait. The woman broke down then, quiet sobs that shook her shoulders. Her son ate mechanically, like he'd learned not to waste food when it appeared. Regina gave them space. Refilled coffee. Let them have dignity. When they finished, the woman stood. I'm Maria. This is Carlos. We've been in our car for 3 days. The shelter was full. I didn't know where else to go. You did right coming here. Can I… Maria hesitated. Can I work for the food? Wash dishes? Clean? I'm a hard worker. I might actually need help. Regina hadn't planned to say it, but the words came anyway. Morning prep. Few hours before we open. Can't pay much, but it includes breakfast. Maria's face transformed. Really? Can you start tomorrow? Yes, thank you. 5 a.m. Don't be late. Maria nodded frantically, gathering Carlos. At the door, she turned back. Why are you helping us? Regina thought about a man in a blood-soaked suit, about a choice made in fear and mercy, about ripples that never stopped spreading. Because someone has to, she said simply. Maria showed up at 4:55 a.m. the next morning. She worked like someone afraid the opportunity might evaporate, thorough, efficient, grateful for every small task. Carlos did his homework in the corner booth, the same booth where Enrique had sat bleeding. Regina watched them and felt something settle in her chest. This was right. This was what the diner was for. By the end of the week, Maria had proven herself invaluable. By the end of the month, Regina gave her a key. You're trusting me with this? Maria held the key like it was made of gold. You've earned it. I won't let you down. I know. The neighborhood continued to change. More businesses opened. The bookstore expanded. A coffee roaster moved into the old warehouse. A community garden appeared in the vacant lot where drug dealers used to operate. People started calling it the Revival District. Articles appeared in local papers about neighborhood transformation. Urban planners studied it. Politicians took credit. Nobody knew the real story. Nobody except Regina, and she'd never tell. 6 months after the storm, Regina was closing up when she noticed someone standing across the street, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a different face beard now, different hair, glasses, but the same posture, the same careful way of holding himself. Enrique. Their eyes met across the distance. Regina's heart clenched. He raised one hand. A small gesture. Not quite a wave. More like acknowledgement. Regina pressed her hand against the window. He stood there for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the evening crowd like smoke. Regina watched the space where he'd been, tears streaming down her face. He'd come back to see, to know his gift had taken root, to witness what mercy could build. She hoped he'd found peace. She hoped he knew that one night had changed more than 2 lives. It had changed dozens, maybe hundreds. Every person who walked through her door, every family that felt safe here, every life touched by the ripple he'd started. Regina locked the door at 9 p.m. Fresh snow was falling again, not heavy, just persistent, the kind that made everything look clean and new. She stood on her sidewalk, looking at the diner. Her diner, Thomas's diner, the diner that had nearly died and been resurrected by an act of improbable kindness. Tomorrow, Maria would arrive at 4:55 a.m., never late. Mr. Patterson would come at 7. The lunch rush would fill every booth. Families would gather for dinner. Life would continue in this small space that had become a beacon, all because Regina Coleman had opened a door during a storm. All because she'd chosen mercy when fear would have been easier. She thought about Enrique's words. Everyone wants something, but she'd wanted nothing except to help a dying man, and in return, he'd given her everything, not payment, not debt, respect. Regina turned off the outside lights and headed home through the falling snow. Behind her, The diner stood solid and bright, a promise that warmth existed in cold places, that kindness mattered, that one person's choice could change the world. The door would open again tomorrow, and every person who walked through it would carry forward the mercy that started on one impossible night. One stranger, one grandmother, one choice that echoed forever. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.